in her New York apartment, she gestured nonchalantly to this vast personal library and said, "Oh, these, I've read all of these." Like, that's what it takes. Again, I come back to this point that I don't think that it's readers that are getting burnt out. Tell me if I'm wrong, please, in the comments. If you are just somebody who watches YouTube, maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe you do feel pressure to read more, but I do think it seems to be more like booktubers themselves. Today we're going to talk about the biggest myth on Booktube, and that is that Booktube is causing reading burnout, that people are losing their love of reading due to a pressure to read many, many books, and that there is something inherently toxic about Booktube engendering this kind of acquisitional aspect of the reading life. I'm going to argue in this video that this rhetoric is avoidable and is based on a lack of clarity around the function of the booktuber. What we're going to do is we're going to look very closely at this idea itself, unpack it a little bit further, what it means when people say that Booktube is causing reading burnout. Then we're going to make some delineations around differences between somebody who consumes Booktube content just as a reader and somebody who makes content as a booktuber. And then we're also going to look at different categories of readers, 3 different categories of readers. And this is just going to be an approximation, and it's just to serve my point about this fallacy that Booktube inherently causes reading burnout. Let's dive into it together. Basically, we can succinctly summarize this issue of reading burnout as the pressure to read more books. So you log on and you watch YouTube videos and you see people doing their, reading wrap-ups and saying, "Oh, I read, 13 books in April and I read 17 books in May, and these are the books I read, and this is what I plan to read coming up." And then people do mid-year check-ins and end-of-year breakdowns. I read 100 books or whatever. To whittle down that sense of the pressure to read more books even more minutely, we can say that it is a focus on numbers. Numbers. Reading, not how many times I cried while reading or how many personal epiphanies I had, but how many books I read. This is where I want to make my first intervention. And this is the question I want to ask. Is reading a lot of books actually a brag? Is it actually a boast? Should there actually be a sense of social pressure to read more books based on other people saying that they've read many books or more books than oneself, or more books than oneself might think possible to actually read? And my answer to that is no. Think about it. Technically, anyone who's literate can read many books. Now, we don't all read at the same pace, of course not. But let's actually just take a bit of a zoomed out look at the numbers, because we're talking about numbers here, right? So there are millions and millions and millions of books in the world. There are more books than any one of us could ever read within 100, possibly within 1,000 lifetimes. Even within a single year, there are more books published than it is possible for one individual to read. The statistical difference between someone reading 2 books a year for the rest of their life and someone reading 2,000 books a year for the rest of their life is actually meaningless, insignificant statistic. So all of us are completely in the dark in terms of having accumulated the experience of reading a large percentage of the books, the extant books in this world. So just keep that in mind. Like, all of this quibbling about, I felt pressure to read more books because, Joe Soap next door read, 30, 40 more books than me last year or whatever. It doesn't mean anything. It's like, I'm going to give you an analogy. It's like trying to drink the whole ocean one shot glass at a time. You take a shot glass, you walk down to the shoreline, you scoop up, a little shot of that briny goodness, and you knock it back. And you grimace because it tastes awful, and you probably swallow like a couple of planktons or blue bottles, or I don't know, right? And then you do it again. That's like trying to read all of the books that exist. Rather just dive in and swim around and try and, strike up a friendship with a dolphin or a manta ray. You're not going to win some ocean drinking competition. None of us are. So that's just one point I wanted to make. The real proof of the pudding is not how many books you can put on your Goodreads, right? The proof of the pudding is how well you can recall what you've read and how well you can synthesize or compare and contrast. And ultimately, when I say that, I mean that from a sort of booktube perspective. As a reader, all that matters is that you enjoy the books you read, and you feel a personal growth, and you feel like you gain experience, you become more fluent and fluid and articulate in your engagement with these texts. But this difference between doing it just for the pleasure and actually becoming a kind of synthesizer, to becoming a kind of bastion of literary analysis, evaluation, comparison, this is where we're going to move from talking about people that just love to read and watch booktube videos to content creators, to people that make booktube videos. Okay, so this is an important distinction to make. I interact with many viewers who comment on my videos. I also read comments of other people's videos. There is a huge number of people that enjoy watching booktube videos that are probably just not bothered to make videos themselves. They're readers first and foremost. They don't have a desire to become content creators. I very rarely, if ever, hear readers saying, gosh, I feel burnt out from booktube. No, because they can just switch it off. If they feel like they're getting negative energy from watching booktube, they will just watch other booktubers, or they will just do something else, probably just spend more time reading. So this next point is really about content creation and about being a booktuber. In order to do this, I want to divide readers into 3 categories here. Now, of course, this is general and schematic, and this is not like set. I'm not trying to lay down the law here, okay? I, in my mind, have like 3 broad categories of readers. Okay, so you can be a casual reader, someone who reads, anything from 1 book a year to, maybe 12 or 20 books a year, right? Roughly a book a month or a book every other week. That's kind of casual reader. There's nothing wrong with that. If you enjoy it, good, and there should be more people who read. There's many people who don't even sit on the scale. They are non-readers. And then I think we can move to sort of this middle ground, which is like avid readers. Now, this is obviously, again, just very, very a general approximation, but you could say that maybe an avid reader is someone who reads a couple of books a month, maybe even a book a week. And avid readers, again, probably just love reading. Maybe it's somehow related to the work they've done or the studies they've done. They're clearly committed to and dedicated to reading, and they are lifelong readers. And then we have the next category up from that, and we're going to call that, again, this is general, like I said, expert readers. Now, here is, I think, the crux of the problem, this sense of pressure to read more books, because anyone can, the beauty of YouTube is that it's a kind of homespun, casual place in which anyone can upload videos and have fun, and that there shouldn't be pressure to do or be anything other than what you want to do. And if you build a small audience that just enjoys your content, that's amazing, and there's many YouTubers that do that. And if you continue to upload videos, and you have a unique personality, and you garner a larger following, and you're making videos weekly about books, you might start to get sent books from publishers. You might start to accumulate some quite serious numbers. Your platform, your audience, the reach of your opinions, your evaluations might start to spread quite wide. Now, I think that if people explicitly claimed or stated up front, like, I am just about fun. I am not here to be an expert. I'm not here to be a kind of bastion of readerly taste or expertise. And yeah, I've got a large following, but hey, it's just for fun, and I'm clearly not trying to achieve expertise or acumen or professionalism in this field. But I think what happens is that people, and it's understandable, right? They just do what they do. They don't need to explain themselves, right? But when you get a larger following, people will probably see you as this spokesperson for your niche, right? Somebody who is clearly engaged on a daily basis, intellectually, mentally, with books. And I think that it's quite natural that you would then be seen as, and if you don't explicitly, demarcate your own position, your own function, your own role, then it's quite a natural occurrence that people would start to see you as an expert. In some way, you become a kind of critic of sorts. You become a person in the world of letters, in the world of literature, spokesman, like I said, of some sort, or certainly a reviewer, a critic, somebody who is weighing in on the zeitgeist, on the world of current literary happenings, book releases. You might even have impacts in the publishing industry. You might excoriate a book that you think is utter rubbish and waste of space, and the sales, might take a hit, or you might praise a book to the heavens, claim it to be the zenith of, romantasy, lizards and aliens coming from space. I don't know. And then the book sales might massively increase, and that could be a huge boon for the author in question and for the publishing house. So the more you grow, the more, kind of inherently you actually start to fill that function of somebody whose views and whose communications about their niche, about their field, actually start to have weight and significance and consequences in this industry, in this world of literature. Okay. And I think that this is where the problem comes, because perhaps there are people who set out to do it for fun, grow quite significantly, and then suddenly feel the need to improve themselves, to become more experienced, to become more learned, more knowledgeable, more articulate in this field, and they don't want to be that. It's a role that is thrust on them because their channel grew, or they see other people around the same size as them doing that. So, and I think that that's probably a luxurious problem to have if you've grown so big that people actually look to you for advice. And if you don't want to do that, you should probably just be honest with your audience about that and say, hey, you know what, like, this thing kind of has grown so big, but I really don't want to be a spokesperson for literature, for contemporary literature or classics or whatever it is. And that's okay. And probably your audience will be fine. I come back to this point that I don't think that it's readers that are getting burnt out. Tell me if I'm wrong, please, in the comments. If you are just somebody who watches YouTube, maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe you do feel pressure to read more, but I do think it seems to be more like booktubers themselves. Okay. Now, if you do embrace the role of spokesperson, you have authority about, the thing that you love, you're doing it full time, you are gaining, a wealth of experience beyond the realm of the part-time enthusiast. To be a professional, to be an expert in any field requires sacrifice. It requires a huge amount of hard work. Let's take, for example, professional sport. Like, now you might love to play football and you might go twice a week with your friends to the park and kick a ball around, and you might think, gosh, I would love to be a professional footballer, but like, I just can't be bothered to do it 8 hours a day, every day for the next 40 years of my life. Well, the thing is that the people that are professional footballers have been doing it since the age of 6 and doing it every day ad nauseum, right? For hours on end, 6 days a week. That's what it takes to become a professional footballer or any other sport. To become an engineer or an accountant or a doctor, you're going to go to university and study for north of 10 years. If you want to be an academic, if you want to be a researcher, if you want to be a historian, like, it doesn't matter what it is. Any of these things take a massive amount of blood, sweat, and tears and sacrifice and years of dedication, and it doesn't stop. It's ongoing, because if you just stop and get complacent, you fall behind your peers. Why would literary criticism be any different? You need to be dedicated to it, and you need to stretch your own personal limits. You need to grow and expand and challenge yourself on a daily, on a weekly basis. And that requires like a lot of reading. And, we're going to look at some examples just to wrap up here. I want to point you to Susan Sontag, right? Literary critic extraordinaire, voice of a generation in many ways. Her first major work was Against Interpretation. She was in her early 30s when this book was published. She had already read a vast amount of literature. Take Virginia Woolf in her book of criticism, The Common Reader. She had already read all of the major works of the Western canon, or a significant number of them, as well as other fields such as biography, and across multiple languages, Take a critic like James Wood, who, when he interviewed Susan Sontag in her New York apartment, she gestured nonchalantly to this vast personal library and said, "Oh, these, I've read all of these." Like, that's what it takes. Now, even within the field of YouTube, there are examples of people that have achieved this and are setting that standard of literary excellence, expertise. And I want to point you to Jackson Crawford, a scholar of Old Norse and Nordic languages. And I mean, he is an exemplar of what I'm talking about. He is a full-time YouTuber, but he's also an arbiter of scholarship and investigations into Old Norse. Look at this. He actually made this post talking about his reading statistics since 2009. He's not abnormal in doing that. Like, that's what it takes to be a scholar of Nordic languages, right? And of any realm of scholarship on a significant level. Steve Donahue is another person who is, a reviewer and a critic, and he reads, as we all know, many, many books. If you are going to accept that function, that role of guide, then you need to read deeply, and you need to read a lot. And in a sense, this is my final point, that the proof is in the pudding. You can't fool your audience. Like, they will be able to tell if you are reading with a shallowness, if you're consuming books quickly just to, to pump up your Goodreads or whatever, or your wrap-up videos. Like, at some point you'll have to talk deeply about these books, and the role of the critic, the role of the reviewer, is to read deeply, but to read very widely, and by reading widely, to evaluate through contrasting and comparing works across genres, across epochs, and able to evaluate whether something betters its forebears or whether it pales in comparison. Be able to analyze in which ways it diverges from expectations, generic and readerly expectations, formal expectations, which ways it conforms to those formal parameters. All of these things require deep and wide reading. So deep and wide. So it is about reading a lot if you want to take on that mantle of being a professional, of being an expert, of being somebody who has authority and acumen in your field. And there's nothing wrong with that. You shouldn't be ashamed to say that you embrace that. We need articulate, sharp-witted people who are experts in their field. Like, that's just what it is. It's not boasting or bragging. Only if you do it on the surface without actually having like the depths of experience underlying those claims. That's a key aspect of transparency and honesty, and you can't fake it. Like, you can't get away with that across hours and hours of content and years of making book videos. There are obviously big booktubers who have been accused from all sides by people who feel that there's something insincere and shallow and callow about that kind of content, where they just hold up bright shiny new releases and give a quick blurb about those books. It's not really edifying, enriching, and rewarding content to watch. It gets a bit stale. So yeah, that's just my 2 cents about that. That the pressure to read, in a way, is kind of absurd, because none of us can ever read a significant number of books in relation to the books that actually exist in the world, regardless of whether we're casual readers or expert readers. But then also, if you don't want that pressure of being somebody that people look up to as an expert, as a guide, as somebody who is engaged in evaluating the canon, or forming or reforming the canon, synthesizing, assimilating, the current works of literature in relation to the vast, rich, profusive history of books, of literature, then you should just say it. Be transparent, be upfront about that, be honest. And I think your audience will appreciate that, and they will perhaps readjust their expectations for your channel. But hey, if you do want to embrace that, if you do want to be an expert, if you do want to be somebody who takes on the charge of offering guidance, of offering evaluation, of offering critical appraisal of books, new releases, or forgotten classics, or timeless classics, whether you're praising them or upbraiding them, then that's also okay. It's not boastful, it's not arrogant, it's just an important function to fill. So maybe what we need ultimately to take away this pressure of burning out or of reading too much is just make clear what kind of booktuber you want to be. Then there's either no pressure on you to do it, or there is pressure and you can handle it, because it's awesome. It's what we love to do. I have worked many jobs in my life, and I've had many jobs that were grungy and exhausting, sometimes even dangerous, definitely unpleasant, jobs that don't, bequeath status on you as a person. And whatever you do, you have to work hard. So to get to work hard doing what you love is a massive privilege, and you should be in or out. Like, if you want that, if you want to dedicate your life to reading books and evaluating them and broadcasting your views in print or on media, social media, on YouTube, then you need to know what it takes. And it takes sacrifice, and it takes a lifetime of dedication. And that means reading deeply, but it does also mean reading a lot of books. So I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you guys think of this. Obviously, I'm not here to start a fight or, condemn any particular individual. It's just about broadening this conversation in a way that I think needed to be broadened, and highlighting some aspects that maybe needed to be defined more clearly. And if you would like to see my own reading statistics, I'd be happy to share that. And I'm going to leave it there. Let me know if you would like to see more of this kind of thing. I look forward to speaking to you guys soon. Thank you for watching.